Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another session. My name's Scott, this is Nathan, and we, for the past several months, have
Yeah.
been taking some books that we've been reading and discussing them with a bent toward recovery. And if you are looking for a recovery meeting, love to have you on Monday nights here at Christ Community Church at 7 o'clock in what we call the Hub. With that said, we are currently working through a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's by Bessel van der Kolk, and we are currently in part 2 called This Is Your Brain on Trauma.
hmm
And chapter 4, Running for Your Life, The Anatomy of Survival. And part of the conversation here is, what is the long-term effect of experiencing trauma? How does it
Mm.
affect your brain? How does that trauma affect your choices and your relationships? And what is the path forward, right, to a healthier response?
Yeah.
So he starts off with, again, you should be aware if you're going to pick up this book, some of it goes real deep, real fast.
hmm
But he starts off with a story of a boy who witnessed 911 and
Yeah.
literally was running for his life, and his
Yeah.
brain kicked in and he saw the trauma and he ran,
hmm
thereby saving his life. But then he goes on, the author was friends with this boy's parents, who apparently called him to speak to him. His name is Noam, and Noam drew a picture about 24 hours after 911, and the author noticed that there was a black circle on the ground. And he said to him, "What is that, Noam?" And Noam said, "It's a trampoline." And the doctor said, "Well, what's that there for?" And he said, "It's so that when people jump, they'll have a safe place to land."
hmm
And so his point there in the opening of chapter 4 is that a child who's raised in a healthy home, relatively healthy home, and
hmm
experiences trauma is not only able to run away and save his life, but after the alarm bells quiet, he's able to begin to process that and think of a way that, if this were to happen in the future, would
hmm
save people's lives.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
I think that there's three solid points that he made, and for children. One, he said, children will take their cue from the parents. So if the parents are able to be calm and respond well to a need or crisis, they will follow suit, whatever the parent comes to. That's usually where they land as well. Two, it's if they are allowed to be in an active role of recovery, like in this way, he was running away himself. Um, he was able to be in that role of, I am running with my dad away from the crisis. So he was part of that. And two, it says he was able to reach a safe place, his house, which represents a very safe place to him. You're able to now let the brain alarm bells de-escalate, and you can start to make sense of what's happening, like you can process in a safe spot. So there's a big height and it comes back down. So I think it's interesting to note, like, sometimes that is not always the case. They used an example of when the people were, I think he said, evacuated from like Hurricane Katrina. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they were just put on either a helicopter or an airplane, just kind of slotted in. And so one, they couldn't go back to their home because obviously their homes was where it happened. And two, they didn't play an active role in their own escape and rescue. They were
Mm.
just kind of put in. And so that contributed to the fact that, they didn't end up in a place where the alarm bells could start to come down. It was a prolonged sense of crisis. So that is an interesting, note, is in crisis, you do need to retreat to a place of safety where you can process, where that you can allow your body and brain to sense that it's not in crisis now.
Right. And it goes into a lot of detail about neurobiology in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It's really
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. One thing that stood out to me, he said, as he describes what you just did and the story of Noam, when you do have a safe place to go and you can process it, obviously that's ideal. But he said for a traumatized person, let's say they don't have a safe place to go. If they're a child and the harm is coming at the hand of their parent,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where normally they could run away, they may feel like they can't run away or literally cannot run away. He
Right.
said,
Because the home is not safe anymore.
that's right, the home is not safe. He
Yeah.
said, especially with repeated trauma or abuse, that
Yeah.
the brain will become stuck
Right.
and
Right.
unable to process emotionally what is going on.
Yep.
And I think of that from a recovery point of view. If your brain is stuck, as he talks about some Vietnam vets who tend to live in the same year that they experienced their trauma in war.
Yeah.
He says in many ways they are emotionally stuck there, and they live their lives as if that trauma is still happening, even though it has passed and realistically it's not going to happen again, or it couldn't happen again, but they remain stuck.
Right.
So if you think about that, how would a person who is emotionally stuck because of trauma, what would you do? Well, one thing you might do is choose a way of self-medicating that would help you deal, right?
Yeah. You're trying to create kind of an internal sense of safety and comfort. And that is why even just being present at Celebrate Recovery, Open Share is so crucial, because you are experiencing, maybe for the first time for some people, a safe place now to de-escalate your brain, to process with others as well, and to know that you can experience a calm and loving place, right?
That's right. In
So
fact, go ahead.
no, it's all right, go ahead.
I was just going to say, part of the DNA of what we call our open share groups, these are small groups after the large group that Nathan's referring to. We have guidelines that we read before each open share group. And one of them, of course, is confidentiality.
Yeah.
Unless somebody threatens to hurt themselves or another person. But other than those reasons, it is safe because it is a confidential place. Plus, one of the guidelines is we're not there to fix each other. We're there to support each other. So you're not going to get a number of small sermons, if you will, on how you should live your life better in that context. You're there in a safe, confidential place where you can just talk about what you've experienced.
Yes. Yeah. So going on, one thing about what you're saying is trauma is continuing to recur. Another thing that happens is that it shuts down. He goes into some science part, and this is about frontal lobes, about the front part of your brain. But it is interesting to note what the front part of your brain does, because he says out of everything, the frontal lobes is what makes us unique in the animal kingdom. So this is where language, abstract thought, allows us to plan and reflect, imagine and play, and they make choice possible and underline, our astonishing ability at creativity. So that is a lot to be said for positive experience in life, creativity, playfulness, planning, reflecting, imagining the future. That's a lot. And for us to lose the connection as much to the frontal lobes is basically, he says, you're not living in the present, and you're just replaying the past over and over. So I don't even know. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, it's almost like, yes, it's post-traumatic, but it's almost like ongoing stress. Yep. Really.
Yeah, so
the brain experiences it.
Yep. He's making the connection that trauma interrupts effectively the connection or the communication between the lower parts of the brain, like the brain stem, the limbic system, the emotional brain, and the rational brain. Yes. And trauma interrupts that. And you stay stuck.
Yeah, and so how do we overcome that? And this is where CR would fit in, as well as step study and the open share. One other thing that's crucial for treatment or understanding trauma is that frontal lobes is where our empathy connection is. It's where also the mirror neurons are.
Yes.
Mirror neurons is vital. This is where we learn how we would mimic someone else's behavior. Like if someone is going through trauma, how can I mimic just the emotional state, and even, he says, even the physical state. Like when you're sitting across from someone, you'll often mirror the body language and the sitting position of the person next to you. And it says that it's crucial because trauma invariably involves not being seen, not being mirrored, not being taken into account. So treatment really needs to activate the capacity to safely mirror and be mirrored by others. So you are isolated basically in your trauma because you're living in the past now. Your brain's living in the past. You are there by yourself. And treatment is really about connecting with others. And so in CR, when you're hearing even other people's testimonies, when you're hearing that it's a safe place, you can now start to re-engage on a community level. It's probably why so many don't come as well to a community like Celebrate Recovery too, because you're isolated in your trauma. To re-engage itself probably feels very, very unsafe to begin with. Also feels very unnatural for someone who's isolated to not be isolated anymore, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're seeing someone else share, perhaps in an appropriate way, depending on the setting, whether it's large group or in the men's groups or the women's groups, but they're sharing what they struggle with.
Yeah.
And a traumatized person may never have experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an invitation not only to be vulnerable, but it's an invitation to experience the vulnerability of another, and therefore from the frontal lobes, the mirror neurons get to see, oh, that's what this looks like.
Right. Because the person who's sharing the testimony will often share, well, in fact, I've never heard it not sharing, the road to recovery being with other people.
Yeah.
And so it's basically saying to someone who's living in trauma, it's okay to re-engage with community. It's okay to engage with a sponsor. It's okay to feel that again. And that hopefully the mirroring will encourage someone to keep that engagement up.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Now, one thought as we wrap it up for this chapter would be, usually when I lead a group for new people that come for the first time, I lead a group called Newcomers 101, and I often say, I said it this last Monday, that CRs could be an important part of your recovery, but not the only part. And so as you know, you read through a chapter like this, we certainly want to say, for all the reasons that we've gone over, CR could be a significant part of your recovery. We also would say there are other parts that you might consider, such as counseling and therapy. And, you know, I would add in, as CR does, you would, our relationship with Christ, all kinds of things. But someone who's experienced trauma, I think CR would be helpful. I also think they should pursue other forms of help, because in CR, you won't be necessarily, like you would in a therapist's office, invited to, okay, I'm going to do this and I want you to imitate how I do it, meaning in a healthy way. Watch what a healthy response looks like. Now, you may see that in CR. You may see somebody responding to their own trauma in a healthy way. But of course, they're not going to turn to you and say, now, Nathan, I'd like you to do that. Right? It's not therapy per se. So
it's really just opportunity. Yeah, it's opportunity to engage. It's an opportunity to try something that your brain is really trying to convince you not to do. Right?
Yeah.
It's in a mode of isolation. It's used to it, and so it wants to almost wants to stay there. In fact, he says, when you can't be fully here, if you like present, you go to the places where you did feel alive, even those places that are filled with horror and misery. So your brain is saying, like, hey, we were fully alive when we were in that trauma, because it's such an intense emotional experience. And in fact, in one chapter it says almost incomprehensible to communicate about, right? And so, his idea, this doctor, he's saying, treatment is really to help people live fully alive, fully present, like in the now. And so, like you said, we're not demanding it. We're giving space for you to relearn how to live.
That's right.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, very, very in-depth chapter. And I'm looking forward to continuing to read the rest of the book, and we'd like to invite you to do the same, maybe at least through our conversation. And so next time we'll pick up with chapter 5, which is body-brain connections. Yeah. All right. See you on the next one, or on Monday. Thanks for joining us. See ya.